Hello, today we will discuss the notion of validity. The notion of validity applies to deductive arguments. Now, we'll study deductive logic in the next section. However, validity can be understood at an intuitive level. Now, we can see that there are different ways in which we can express the fact that an argument is valid. We can say that the conclusion follows the premises, or that the conclusion is a logical consequence of the premises, or that the conclusion is implicitly contained in the premises, or that valid argument forms are truth-preserving. All of those are different ways of getting at the same idea. Here's an example of a valid argument. Notice that if you assume that the premises are true, then you also have to accept that the conclusion is true. Let's take a closer look. Suppose that we make the first premise true, namely that all tigers are mammals. So the inner red circle is a set of tigers, and the outer black circle is a set of mammals. So here we represent the fact that all tigers are mammals. That is, that the collection of tigers is entirely contained in the collection of mammals. So what we're claiming here, basically, is that it is impossible to be a tiger without also being a mammal. Here we make the second premise true by putting Al in the circle of tigers. So we've made both premises true. Now the question is, once we have made the premises true, could the conclusion be false? Well, certainly not. We can see that just by making the two premises true, we have also made the conclusion true, namely that Al is a mammal, right? So we can see that it's impossible to deny it because Al lies completely within the circle of mammals. So this argument is valid, and we say that the premises secure the conclusion, or that they entail the conclusion. Here's an example of an invalid argument. Okay, so let's apply the same procedure as we did in the previous example. So we see that the first premise is identical, so we represent it in the same way. All tigers are mammals. That is, the circle of tigers is completely contained within the circle of mammals. Now, the second premise is different, and this is what's crucial. The second premise says that Al is a mammal. Now, how to make that true? Well, you can see that we could put Al anywhere within the circle of mammals, right? These are all some of the possible positions that we can assign to Al. But suppose that we choose this, right? Let's place Al there. Well, this makes the second premise true, right? Al is a mammal. So it is perfectly acceptable. But in this case, the conclusion is false, or can be false. So it is possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false. So suppose that Al is a giraffe, and that is why Al is a mammal, but it's not a tiger. So the argument is invalid. It is possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false. So the truth of the premises does not guarantee the truth of the conclusion. And here we arrived at the notion of validity, at the definition of validity. So an argument is valid if and only if, whenever the premises are true, the conclusion is true as well, right? So if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true as well. Another way of saying it is that it is impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false. But one consequence of the definition is that you could have an argument that is valid, but whose premises are not actually true. This is because the notion of validity depends on a big if, right? If the premises are true, and we're not guaranteed that the premises are actually true, that is, if the premises are true, then the conclusion must be true as well, right? So in order to evaluate validity, you should engage in a bit of make-believe, right? If it were the case that the premises are true, then the conclusion would be true as well. This illustrates the point. So, premise 1, all Catholics live in Canada. Premise 2, the Pope is Catholic. Conclusion, therefore the Pope lives in Canada. Now imagine that the premises were true. In that case, the conclusion would have to be true as well. So it is a valid argument. However, it just so happens that one of the premises is false, namely the first premise. So this argument, although valid, still leaves something to be desired. It's not the ideal argument. What happens with this argument is that it is not sound, right? And soundness is better than mere validity. So an argument is sound if and only if it is valid and it has true premises, right? So you must have these two conditions. First, validity, and then truth of the premises. From this, it follows, right, that you can't have a sound argument that is invalid, because the notion of soundness presupposes the notion of validity. So this can be seen here. So we have the bigger collection of arguments, and then only some of them are valid arguments, right? Namely those in which the truth of the premises guarantees the truth of the conclusion. And within the set of valid arguments, only some are sound, right? Namely, they're valid, and also all the premises are true. Okay, I'm going to ask the question again, in case you've forgotten. Could you have an argument that is sound, but not valid? No, it's impossible. Because an argument is sound if and only if it is valid and it has true premises. So in order for an argument to be sound, it has to be valid first. And of course, on the other hand, it is possible for an argument to be valid but not sound. Another important notion here is that of a counterexample. A counterexample is a possible situation in which an argument's premises are true and its conclusion is false. And if so, it is called a counterexample to the argument, or to the validity of the argument, right? Notice that it has to be a possible argument. And how does it threaten the validity of the argument? Well, recall the notion of validity. So an argument is valid if and only if, whenever the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true as well. And when is an argument invalid? Well, when it is possible for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false. And what a counterexample does is to illustrate the possibility of the premises to be true and the conclusion false. That is, it shows that the argument is invalid. For instance, take this argument. All philosophers know ancient Greek. 2. Al is not a philosopher. 3. Therefore, Al doesn't know Greek, ancient Greek. Now, this argument is invalid. And this is because it has at least one counterexample. So, suppose that the first premise is true, right? Suppose that all philosophers know ancient Greek. This is not actually true, but imagine that it is true. And suppose that Al is not a philosopher. Now, does it follow that Al doesn't know ancient Greek? Not necessarily. Imagine a situation where 1 and 2 are true, but in addition, although he's not a philosopher, he is a classics professor who happens to specialize on ancient Greek, right? In that case, both premises are true, but the conclusion is false. And so we have a counterexample to the validity of the argument, right? Now, does this argument have a counterexample? 1. All philosophers know ancient Greek. 2. Al doesn't know ancient Greek. 3. Therefore, Al isn't a philosopher. Now, this argument doesn't have a counterexample because it is a valid argument. And we'll later learn some techniques for determining validity. Some exercises. Now, say for each of the following arguments whether it is valid or invalid, and explain why. So let's take first, right? Well, this argument is valid, right? All tigers are nurses. All nurses are fuzzy. Therefore, all tigers are fuzzy. It is valid. But it's not sound. Why? Because it is not the case that all tigers are nurses, right? Because, as a matter of, I don't think that there's even one tiger that is a nurse. So this argument is valid, but it's not sound. Okay, now number 2. The winning ticket is number 315. I have number 316. Thus, I do not have the winning ticket. So is 2 valid? Can you come up with a counterexample? If you want, you can pause the video to think for a second. Okay, did you come up with a counterexample? Well, here's a possibility. A counterexample could be a situation in which I have both 315 and 316, in which case both premises would be true and the conclusion would be false, right? It would be true that the winning ticket is number 315, but also that I have number 316. And note that this is possible because it is nowhere stated that I only have one ticket. Now, if you had a premise like C, I only have one ticket, then the argument would be valid. Why? Because it would block the possibility of our counterexample. And what about the following two? Well, I'll let you find out for yourself. So if you have any doubts, you can ask me or you can ask your classmates. Bye.